It was the mid-'80s, and Billy Bob Thornton found himself working as a waiter at a fancy Hollywood party. While he was serving, a guest stopped him and asked if he wanted to be an actor. Billy said yes. The man didn't sugarcoat his reply and said, "You're too ugly to be a leading man, but you're too pretty to be a character actor," leaving Billy questioning his future. But here's what's interesting. That person turned out to be the legendary filmmaker, Billy Wilder. Before walking away, Wilder left Billy with advice that would shape his career. Focus on writing, create your own characters, and make your own way. Otherwise, you'll be just another guy. Sure enough, around a decade later, Billy did just that. He didn't just star in the 1996 cult classic Sling Blade. He wrote and directed it, crafting the unforgettable character of Carl Childers for himself. But, like the movie, Billy was a sleeper hit who didn't get all the mainstream attention like Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, or Leonardo DiCaprio. Honestly, Billy was neither a screen sweetheart, nor did he possess that raw star power. What he did have, though, was a curse. Something he later admitted was a blessing in disguise. To understand the curse, we need to go back to his childhood. Born into a line of sawmill workers in the small town of Hot Springs, Arkansas, Billy's life was destined. Become a worker just like the men in his family. However, little Billy the Goat was different. He had an interest in writing stories from as early as 3rd grade. Unfortunately for him, he did not have great family support for his artistic endeavor, especially not from his father, William Raymond Thornton.
So, if you wanted to play piano, you're not my son.
Thornton's father was an extremely violent man. The abuse was so intense that he became anxious whenever his dad came home, causing him to develop obsessive-compulsive disorder over time. He says, "You start to develop these little tricks in your head. Like, if I just break this toothpick into 3 even pieces, my father will come home in a good mood and he won't beat me." Strangely enough, Billy has created characters that are similar to his abusive upbringing. Take, for example, his most renowned work to date, Sling Blade. In his own words, Billy says, 90% of the stuff in Sling Blade really happened. I've seen way more than I want to see in my lifetime, and I think Sling Blade was a way for me to regain some security and some innocence about my past and the things I've seen. Then in Jane Mansfield's Car, he played Jim Caldwell, a cold, distant father, partly inspired by his dad.
My own character in this, and it was the father, because I've played characters similar to my father before and written about characters based on my father before. This was just another aspect of him.
His childhood trauma carried into his adulthood, affecting his relationships. Billy has been married 6 times and has had numerous relationships, a number that tells a story. When Dateline NBC's Ann Curry asked him if he tried to rescue his partner from their trauma, Billy said, "True. Yes, I try to rescue them, and I expect them to rescue me." His unresolved need for validation and emotional insecurity often created imbalances in his relationships, making them difficult to sustain. What made things even worse was the untimely death of his baby brother Jimmy in 1988.
My brother Jimmy, he was a young guy. In 1988, he died suddenly of a heart problem that they didn't know he had. He was 2 years younger than me.
It left Thornton unable to trust happiness, creating a fear of loss that made it hard for him to fully open up in relationships.
And then he died, and I've never trusted happiness.
Speaking of relationships, you remember Billy and Angelina Jolie's unusual love story, right?
Custom life has gone to hell. How much fun do you guys have?
I'm just happy.
It's a beautiful train wreck.
Well, I need a kiss, please. Sorry. Thanks. I said a kiss. Jesus Christ.
Their relationship, which lasted 3 years, looked more like a spectacle and less like a marriage. They were Hollywood's most eccentric couple, giving a literal inferiority complex to the likes of Megan Fox and MGK today. They wore vials of each other's blood, publicly declared their obsession with one another, and seemed to thrive in chaos. But behind the theatrics, their differences were impossible to ignore, which ultimately ended their notorious fling. Their chaotic love story reflected something deeper about Billy, that he still carries the weight of his childhood scars. However, he is not one to gloat. In fact, he enjoys talking about his multiple divorces.
I mean, this
I'm
for real.
not kidding. I used to make a joke that every time, well, it's not really a joke. Every time I would get a divorce, I would live at the Sunset Marquis, which was pretty often.
Off-screen, his raw, unpolished authenticity made him magnetic, but it also made him unpredictable. Nowhere was this more evident than in his infamous clash with Q Magazine's Jian Gongxi.
Would I say that he's passionate about music?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really? Would you explain why it's not a hobby?
Would I explain why it's not a hobby? Are you reacting to the fact that I said
Yeah,
at the
I am. Since you're instructed not to talk about shit like that, yeah, I am reacting to that. Yeah.
This wasn't just a blow-up. It was a moment that left everyone questioning Billy's personality. Thornton had specifically asked the producers to focus on his band, the Boxmasters, rather than his acting career. When the interview went in the opposite direction, passive-aggressive Billy Bob Thornton took center stage. While trauma or life struggles don't excuse rudeness, that's just who Billy is. He isn't about putting on a polished act. What you see is what you get. No PR filter, no media coaching, just raw honesty. Take his response to Stephen Colbert, for example, who asked if he'd ever inspired someone the way Billy Wilder inspired him.
He said, "Can you write at all?" And I said, "Actually, I have been writing, and I used to write, short stories and stuff like that. I'm writing now." He said, "That's what you do." He said, "You write your own stories, create your own characters, make your own way, because otherwise you're standing on the sidewalk with everybody else." And he said, that's how you get noticed. And sure enough, I co-wrote this movie called One False Move with Tom Epperson. And 4 or 5 years later, I did Sling Blade, and that's how it all happened. Yeah.
Now,
It was Billy Wilder.
that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
Who was that? It was Billy Wilder.
Yeah.
Billy is a modern-day Clint Eastwood. Like Eastwood, he's brash, unapologetic, and fiercely himself. Speaking of which, we're about to release a video about Eastwood, so make sure you are subscribed for that. Now back to the video. Billy isn't someone who chases the spotlight. He'd rather play characters that feel authentic than take on iconic roles that don't align with who he is. Just so you know, he turned down the Green Goblin in Spider-Man and the role of a main villain in Mission Impossible 3 because they didn't sit right with him. He says, "I don't have much interest in those kinds of roles. I prefer to keep things looser and less predictable."
But it's like, I think it went,
Well, I reckon what you're wanting to know is what I'm doing in here. Well, I reckon the reason I'm in here is because I kill somebody.
That same drive for authenticity led him to directing. But after Harvey Weinstein butchered his film All the Pretty Horses, cutting it down and stripping it of its essence to please mainstream audiences, he decided he was done. He definitely doesn't kid around when it comes to being genuine. Billy most recently worked in the series Landman, where he played the character of Lieutenant Tommy Norris. He played the role to perfection and was even nominated for the Golden Globes. On the surface, he's a man with every possible accolade you can imagine, but underneath there lies a man shaped by his childhood scars. Billy has now come to terms with his past and even appreciates what his father taught him, however horrible that was. He acknowledges that it was this very environment that drove him to succeed.
but the thing about it that I learned, that I appreciate now, a lot of what he was trying to say was right.
Such as?
His values and the things that he was trying to instill in me, he didn't know how to do it. He did it in a horrible way.
Love him or hate him, Billy Bob Thornton is a man who refuses to be anything but himself. Perhaps that's the real story here. Not whether his authenticity is a blessing or a curse, but how he turned his struggles into his most defining strength. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button if you enjoyed this content.